Captain Vexlar had been having what he considered a perfectly reasonable Tuesday morning, until his ship's AI decided to ruin it with an announcement that made his 3 hearts skip approximately 4.5 beats. Alert! Class 12 Apex Predator detected on planetary surface. Threat level, please update your will immediately. Now Vexlar had been exploring the galaxy for 237 years, and in all that time he'd encountered exactly 0 Class 12 Apex Predators. Mostly because anything that dangerous was usually too busy eating entire star systems to bother with small reconnaissance ships. But here they were, orbiting some backwater mudball called Earth, and their sensors were practically screaming about something down there that could apparently bench press a small moon. "Quinta!" he barked at his science officer, a 7-foot-tall crystalline being who looked like someone had taught a chandelier how to use laboratory equipment. "Run those scans again, and this time, try not to break the scanner with your excitement." Quinta's faceted head rotated 90 degrees, which was her species' equivalent of rolling their eyes. "Captain, I have run the scans 14 times. The readings are consistent. Whatever is down there registers as the most dangerous predator our databases have ever recorded." "More dangerous than a Vorthan deathworm?" "Yes." "More dangerous than a nebula kraken?" "Captain, the readings suggest this creature could use a nebula kraken as dental floss." Vexlar slumped in his command chair, which was designed for beings with significantly fewer anxiety disorders than he was currently experiencing. This was supposed to be a simple first contact mission. Find the newly discovered sentient species, make nice, invite them to join the Galactic Council, and get home in time for the season finale of Real Housewives of the Andromeda Galaxy. "Pip," he called to their communications specialist, a nervous rabbit-like creature whose ears were currently pressed so flat against his head they looked like they were trying to hide behind his skull. "Are you picking up any transmissions from the surface?" Pip's voice came out as a squeak that would have made a mouse feel self-conscious. "Yes, sir. But they're strange. Lots of something called memes, and videos of small Earth creatures doing amusing things. Oh, and arguments about something called pineapple pizza that seem to have reached theological levels of intensity." "That's it," Vexlar announced, standing up with the determination of someone who had clearly not thought this through. "We're going down there. If we're going to be eaten by a Class 12 Apex Predator, at least we'll make history as the first ones stupid enough to volunteer for it." What Captain Vexlar and his crew couldn't see from their orbital position was that their Class 12 Apex Predator was at that very moment sitting in a worn office chair, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that read, "I paused my game to be here." Jake Martinez was 32 years old, worked as a software developer, and had never killed anything more dangerous than a spider, and even then he usually just relocated it outside because he felt guilty. On his lap sat the true source of their sensor readings, Mr. Whiskers, a 12-pound orange tabby cat who was currently engaged in the most terrifying activity known to the galaxy. He was purring, and according to the alien's sensors, that purr was registering as a low-frequency intimidation pattern capable of paralyzing prey from 3 star systems away. Science Officer Quinta was having the time of her crystalline life. After decades of cataloging space moss and examining the mating habits of sentient gas clouds, she finally had a proper apex predator to study. She'd set up a complete surveillance array around the human's dwelling and was documenting every behavior with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered that chocolate was a vegetable. "Fascinating," she muttered, her voice creating harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "Subject has begun the morning consumption ritual. Note: the dark liquid appears to be some form of combat stimulant. Observe how the predator's alertness increases with each ingestion." On her screens, Jake Martinez was having his second cup of coffee and trying to remember if he'd saved his work from the night before. He scratched his stomach, yawned, and checked his phone for the 17th time in 5 minutes. "Remarkable," Quinta continued her narration. "The apex predator is now engaging in territorial scanning behavior, using what appears to be a handheld detection device. See how methodically it surveys its domain." Captain Vexlar peered over her shoulder, watching Jake scroll through social media while Mr. Whiskers relocated himself from lap to keyboard, as cats do when they sense their human might actually accomplish something productive. "And the smaller predator?" Vexlar asked, genuinely curious despite his mounting dread. "Clearly the tactical specialist," Quinta replied without hesitation. "Watch this." On screen, Mr. Whiskers had positioned himself directly on Jake's laptop keyboard. The cat's weight was pressing random keys, causing Jake's video call application to launch and automatically dial into his morning stand-up meeting. "Jim, you're early today," came a voice from the laptop. "Also, why is your camera so orange and fuzzy?" Jake gently moved Mr. Whiskers aside. Sorry everyone, technical difficulties. The cat has opinions about my productivity today. Incredible, Quinta breathed, her crystalline structure refracting the light in patterns that indicated extreme scientific arousal. The smaller predator has just demonstrated advanced technological manipulation. It activated the human's long-ranged communication array with precision timing. This was clearly coordinated. Coordinated for what? Pip squeaked from his station. Pack hunting, obviously. Notice how the human immediately began communicating with what are undoubtedly other members of his hunting party. Listen to the tactical language they're using. On the screen, Jake was explaining why the login bug they'd been chasing was probably related to a database timeout issue, while Mr. Whiskers had moved on to his next important task, knocking a pen off the desk and watching it fall with the intensity of a physicist discovering gravity. Database timeout, Vexlar repeated slowly. That sounds ominous. Extremely, Quinta agreed. They're discussing the systematic shutdown of some kind of data storage facility, probably where they keep information about their prey. Meanwhile, Mr. Whiskers had discovered that Jake's coffee mug made an interesting sound when tapped with a paw. The rhythmic tinking noise was picked up by the alien sensors and immediately classified as a percussion-based communication system. The tactical unit is now transmitting coded messages, Quinta announced. The frequency and interval suggest a high-level strategic briefing. Stop that, Jake said absently, moving his coffee mug away from Mr. Whiskers' questing paw. I need that caffeine to survive this meeting. Did you hear that? Pip's ears shot up so fast they nearly achieved escape velocity. It said it needs the combat stimulant to survive. They're planning something. Quinta was practically vibrating with excitement, which in her species created a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. We're witnessing apex predator behavior that's never been documented. The level of sophisticated coordination between the primary hunter and its tactical specialist is beyond anything in our database. What they were actually witnessing was Jake trying to explain to his coworker Dave why the new feature request was technically impossible, while Mr. Whiskers had gotten bored with the pen and was now staring intently at a dust mote floating in a sunbeam, his pupils dilated to maximum cute overload settings. Look at those ocular adaptations, Quinta whispered in awe. The smaller predator's visual sensors have expanded to maximum sensitivity. It's clearly tracking something we can't even detect. Maybe we should abort this mission, Vexlar suggested hopefully. Come back when they're hibernating or something. Absolutely not, Quintet declared. This is the discovery of a lifetime. We're going to make first contact with the most perfectly evolved hunting duo in the galaxy. And that, as Captain Vexlar would later reflect while filling out the incident report, was when everything really started to go wrong. The decision to make first contact was reached through what could generously be called a democratic process, and more accurately described as Quinta threatening to crystallize anyone who disagreed with her. Captain Vexlar, being a practical sort who valued his molecular cohesion, decided that sending someone expendable would be the wisest course of action. Pip, he announced with the false cheer of someone about to ruin someone else's day. Congratulations, you've just been promoted to first contact specialist. Pip's ears drooped so far they practically reached his ankles. Sir, with respect, I didn't apply for that position. Also, I'm pretty sure that position didn't exist 5 seconds ago. It exists now. Here's your equipment. Vexlar handed him a translation device, a camera, and what appeared to be a small white flag. The flag is in case you need to surrender quickly. That's not reassuring, sir. It wasn't meant to be. 20 minutes later, Pip found himself standing on Jake Martinez's front porch, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane and trying to work up the courage to knock. The translation device around his neck was already working overtime, picking up the terrifying sounds from inside the dwelling. The low hum of what the device labeled as electronics, the occasional thump of footsteps, and, most ominously, a rhythmic rumbling that the translator couldn't quite classify, but marked as possibly digestive, possibly seismic. That was Mr. Whiskers purring on his favorite sunny spot on the couch. Pip raised a trembling paw and knocked. The sounds inside immediately stopped, which Pip interpreted as the predators going into hunting mode. What actually happened was that Jake paused his music and called out, "Just a second." The door opened, and Pip found himself face to face with his first human. Jake was wearing sweatpants, a faded Star Wars t-shirt, and an expression of mild confusion that Pip immediately cataloged as predatory evaluation. "Ah," Jake said, looking down at the 3-foot-tall rabbit creature on his doorstep. "Are you here about the YouTube thing? Because I specifically said no furry costumes in my videos." Pip consulted his translation device, which helpfully informed him that Jake had just referenced something called YouTube and made a statement about furry costumes that the device had filed under possible territorial markings. "Greetings, Apex Predator," Pip squeaked, reading from the script Quinta had hastily prepared. "I come in peace from the Galactic Council to establish diplomatic relations with your hunting pack." Jake blinked. Then he looked up and down the street, clearly expecting to see cameras or his neighbors laughing at what was obviously an elaborate prank. When he didn't spot any obvious culprits, he decided to play along. "Right," he said slowly. "Galactic Council. Got it. And you are?" "I am Communications Specialist Pip of the reconnaissance vessel Starbound Hope. We have been observing your predatory excellence and wish to invite your species to join our galactic community." "My predatory excellence," Jake repeated, glancing back into his apartment where Mr. Whiskers had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of a new voice. The cat took one look at Pip and immediately decided this small, nervous creature needed to be investigated, befriended, and possibly sat upon. Mr. Whiskers approached with the confident stride of a creature who had never met a lap he couldn't claim, and Pip nearly fainted. The small orange predator was moving directly toward him with obvious intent, its green eyes locked onto his position with laser-like focus. "Oh no," Pip whispered. "The tactical unit is approaching. It's going to assess my threat level." "That's just my cat," Jake said, crouching down to pet Mr. Whiskers, who had begun weaving around Pip's legs and purring loudly enough to make the translator device spark. "He likes meeting new people. Don't you, buddy?" The translator, overwhelmed by the proximity of Mr. Whiskers' purring, began outputting increasingly desperate interpretations. "Threat assessment complete. Initiating psychological warfare. Target appears vulnerable to charm offensive. Deploying maximum affection protocols." Pip stood frozen as Mr. Whiskers completed his initial investigation by performing the ultimate cat power move. He flopped down directly on Pip's feet and began grooming himself, trapping the alien in place while simultaneously demonstrating complete indifference to his existence. He's claiming me," Pip whispered in horror. "The tactical specialist has marked me as property." Jake laughed, which the translator interpreted as victory vocalization. "Yeah, he does that. You're stuck there until he decides to move. Could be 5 minutes, could be 5 hours. He's got a very flexible schedule." From orbit, Quinta was watching this entire exchange with growing excitement. "Incredible. The smaller predator has successfully immobilized our contact specialist using what appears to be weaponized cuteness. And look at how the human is controlling the situation without any apparent effort. These creatures are even more dangerous than we thought." Back on the porch, Jake was starting to realize that either this was the most elaborate prank in history or he was actually talking to an alien. The creature's technology looked genuine. It knew things about galactic councils that seemed oddly specific for a costume, and most convincingly, Mr. Whiskers was treating it like any other new friend, which meant it probably wasn't human in a suit because cats always knew. "So," Jake said, settling into what was clearly going to be a longer conversation than he'd planned. "You said something about diplomatic relations. What exactly does that involve?" Pip, still trapped under Mr. Whiskers, consulted his notes with growing panic. "Well, typically we assess the species' technological level, cultural development, and military capabilities before extending an invitation to join the Galactic Council." "Military capabilities?" Jake repeated. "Right. Well, I can tell you right now that my military capabilities are pretty much limited to arguing with people on Twitter and knowing way too much about science fiction." The translator processed this as advanced psychological warfare training and extensive tactical simulation experience. "Fascinating," Pip squeaked, making notes. "And you're tactical specialist?" They both looked down at Mr. Whiskers, who had rolled onto his back and was now demanding belly rubs from his new alien friend. "His tactical capabilities include knocking things off tables, sleeping 18 hours a day, and judging me for my life choices," Jake said. "Oh, and he once caught a moth. That was pretty impressive. Asymmetric warfare specialist with expertise in psychological operations and aerial target acquisition," the translator helpfully interpreted. And that was the moment Jake realized he might be in over his head. What happened next would later be studied in xenobiology textbooks across 17 different star systems, though none of the academics would ever quite believe the reports were accurate. It started when Mr. Whiskers, having thoroughly investigated his new alien friend and found him adequately warm, decided that Pip needed to experience the full tour of his domain. The cat stood up, stretched with the casual arrogance of a creature who had never doubted his own perfection, and began walking toward the apartment. He paused at the threshold, looked back at Pip with an expression that clearly said, "Are you coming or not?" and meowed once. Pip's translator immediately began working overtime. "Follow me, subordinate. Time for strategic briefing in primary command center." "I think he wants you to come inside," Jake offered helpfully, though he was starting to suspect that his translation might be somewhat different from what Pip's device was telling him. "The tactical specialist is inviting me into their fortress," Pip whispered into his communicator. "I repeat, I'm being granted access to their operational headquarters." From orbit, Captain Vexlar's voice crackled through the comm. "Pip, this is incredibly dangerous. These predators might be luring you into a trap." "With respect, sir," Pip replied, carefully stepping over the threshold while Mr. Whiskers supervised the process. "I'm already trapped under a 12-pound tactical unit who seems to think I exist purely for his convenience. At this point, I'm just going with it." Jake's apartment was, to put it charitably, the living space of a single software developer who had recently discovered that ordering takeout was easier than cooking. There were takeout containers on the coffee table, 3 different gaming consoles connected to a TV that was probably larger than most people's first apartments, and enough cables running across the floor to suggest that Jake either had a very complex home network or was secretly planning to launch his own satellite. To Pip, it looked like a command center that would make a military strategist weep with envy. "Observe the multiple communication arrays," he whispered into his communicator, gesturing at Jake's entertainment system. "And look at this network infrastructure. They've hardwired connections running throughout the entire facility." Mr. Whiskers, meanwhile, had made a beeline for his favorite spot, Jake's computer desk. The desk housed Jake's primary workstation, complete with 3 monitors, a keyboard that probably cost more than some people's cars, and a chair that Mr. Whiskers had long ago declared to be his personal throne whenever Jake wasn't using it. Which was always, from Mr. Whiskers' perspective, because cats operate on a different understanding of property rights than humans. "The tactical specialist is approaching what appears to be the primary control console," Pip reported, watching as Mr. Whiskers leapt onto the desk with practiced ease. "That's just my computer," Jake said, walking over to check his email. "He likes to supervise my work, by which I mean he likes to walk across my keyboard at the worst possible moments, and somehow always manages to—" Jake's explanation was cut short as Mr. Whiskers, with the timing that only cats possess, walked directly across the keyboard, but instead of simply typing random characters or accidentally deleting important files, something extraordinary happened. The screens lit up with system diagnostic information that Jake had never seen before. Windows started opening and closing in rapid succession, displaying network statistics, system performance metrics, and diagnostic data that shouldn't have been accessible through normal user interfaces. Lines of code began scrolling across one monitor, while another displayed what looked like an optimization routine running on Jake's graphics card. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, staring at his computer, as it performed operations he definitely hadn't programmed it to do. "Incredible," Pip breathed, his translation device working frantically to process what it was seeing. "The tactical specialist has interfaced directly with your primary control system. Look at the efficiency improvements it's implementing." And indeed, Jake's computer was running smoother than it had in months. Programs that usually took forever to load were opening instantly. His internet connection seemed to have mysteriously improved, and his graphics card was somehow running cooler despite processing more data than it had ever handled before. Mr. Whiskers, completely unaware that he had just performed what amounted to technological wizardry, settled down on the keyboard in his favorite position, right in the center, with his tail draped artistically across the spacebar and his paws positioned perfectly to press the most important keys, if he decided to stretch. "He's maintaining direct control of the interface," Pip reported. "Captain, I think this cat might actually be smarter than our ship's AI." From space, Quinta's voice practically vibrated with excitement. "Get readings on everything. I want to know how it's interfacing with primitive technology using only biological components." Jake, meanwhile, was starting to have the uncomfortable realization that maybe, just maybe, his cat was not entirely normal. He'd always known Mr. Whiskers was smart. The cat could open doors, turn on faucets, and had once somehow ordered cat treats from Jake's Amazon account. But this was different. "Okay," Jake said slowly, addressing both Pip and Mr. Whiskers. "I'm starting to think there might be some things about this situation that I don't fully understand." Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to meow, a sound that Pip's translator interpreted as, "Affirmative, initiating Phase 2 of Integration Protocol." "Phase 2?" Jake asked. That's when the doorbell rang again. And again. And then it rang 17 more times in rapid succession, followed by what sounded like several different voices arguing in languages that definitely weren't from Earth. "Sir," Pip squeaked into his communicator, I think the rest of your crew just arrived. Jake looked at his front door, then at Pip, then at Mr. Whiskers, who was now purring with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. Right, Jake said, with the tone of someone who had just realized his quiet Tuesday morning had officially become the weirdest day of his life. I guess we should probably answer that. Mr. Whiskers meowed once more, and somehow, Jake could have sworn it sounded like the cat was laughing. The delegation that had assembled on Jake's front porch looked like the universe's most dysfunctional boy band. There was Ambassador Kreebok, a 7-foot-tall insectoid creature wearing what appeared to be formal diplomatic robes that kept getting tangled in his antennae. Next to him stood Cultural Attaché Zilm, a being that looked like someone had crossed a jellyfish with a philosophy professor, floating 3 feet off the ground and occasionally changing colors based on what Jake could only assume were emotional states. Rounding out the group was military advisor Torx, who resembled a small mountain that had learned to walk upright, and apparently believed that the best diplomatic uniform was full battle armor covered in enough weapons to invade a small planet. They had been standing outside for approximately 6 minutes, during which time their various translation devices had been picking up increasingly alarming sounds from inside Jake's apartment. Human speech, alien communication, and, most disturbingly, what their systems kept classifying as tactical purring with aggressive undertones. "Ambassador," Torx rumbled in a voice like grinding boulders, "perhaps we should have brought more firepower." "We brought you," Kreebok replied, adjusting his robes again as they caught on his left antenna. "According to our intelligence reports, you're enough firepower to level a city." "That was before we knew we were dealing with Class 12 apex predators," Torx pointed out. "I might need backup, maybe an entire fleet." Cultural Attaché Zilm shifted to a worried shade of purple. "Colleagues, perhaps we should approach this diplomatically. These creatures may simply have different customs than we're used to." "Different customs," Torx snorted, which sounded like a rock slide. "Different customs don't register as Class 12 apex predators on our sensors." When Jake finally opened the door, he was greeted by what could only be described as the galaxy's most nervous diplomatic expedition. Ambassador Kreebok stepped forward, consulted a small device, and began what was clearly a prepared speech. "Greetings, human Jake Martinez. I am Ambassador Kreebok of the Galactic Council. We come bearing the formal invitation for your species to join our cosmic community as honored members of the Warrior Caste." Jake blinked several times. "I'm sorry, did you just say Warrior Caste?" "Indeed," Kreebok continued, his antennae twitching nervously. "Your reputation as apex predators has spread throughout the galaxy. We are here to formalize diplomatic relations and discuss your species' role in galactic defense." "There's been a misunderstanding," Jake started to say, but was interrupted by Mr. Whiskers, who had apparently decided that the gathering on his front porch required his personal supervision. The cat strolled out of the apartment with the casual confidence of a creature who owned everything he could see and was simply allowing others to exist in his presence. The effect on the diplomatic delegation was immediate and dramatic. Ambassador Kreebok's antennae shot straight up in alarm. Cultural Attaché Zilm turned a shade of yellow that probably meant terror in his species' color vocabulary. Military advisor Torx actually took a step backward, which, for a creature his size, required significant effort, and made the porch shake. "The tactical specialist has arrived," Pip whispered into his communicator from inside the apartment. "Repeat, the small orange one is now in direct visual contact with the diplomatic team." Mr. Whiskers surveyed the assembled aliens with the critical eye of a creature who had strong opinions about the quality of his welcoming committee. After a moment of consideration, he approached Ambassador Kreebok and performed the most devastating diplomatic maneuver in his arsenal. He rubbed against the alien's legs while purring loudly. Kreebok froze like a statue, his translation device frantically outputting interpretations. "Preliminary threat assessment complete. Target has been evaluated and found acceptable for current purposes. Initiating friendly intimidation protocols." "He likes you," Jake offered helpfully. "That's actually a good sign. He's usually pretty standoffish with strangers." It's marking me," Kreebok whispered in fascination and terror. "The tactical unit is claiming me as an asset." Mr. Whiskers, having completed his assessment of the insectoid ambassador, moved on to Cultural Attaché Zilm. The floating jellyfish being watched in horrified fascination as the cat sat down directly beneath him and began staring upward with the intense focus that cats reserve for things they find either extremely interesting or potentially edible. "Why is it looking at me like that?" Zilm asked, shifting from worried purple to panicked chartreuse. "He's probably wondering how you taste," Jake said without thinking, then quickly added, "I mean, wondering what you are. He's curious about new things." Zilm's color shifted through several shades that probably represented various stages of existential crisis. Military advisor Torx, meanwhile, was having his own issues. He had prepared for this mission by reviewing every known combat technique, studying battle strategies from across the galaxy, and mentally preparing himself to face down the most dangerous predators in known space. He had not prepared to be completely disarmed by a 12-pound orange cat who was now weaving between his legs and somehow making his advanced battle armor feel silly and overdone. "This is not what I expected," Torx admitted, his voice carrying a note of confusion that was probably rarely heard from 7-foot-tall walking mountains. "What exactly were you expecting?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. "Teeth," Ambassador Kriok replied immediately. "Lots of teeth, possibly claws. Definitely some kind of threatening posture and aggressive territorial displays." "Well," Jake said, looking down at Mr. Whiskers, who had now sprawled across the porch in a patch of sunlight and was demonstrating his most fearsome ability, looking adorable while simultaneously blocking the path for anyone who wanted to move. "He does have claws, and he can be pretty territorial about his food bowl." "Food bowl," Torx repeated slowly. "Is that where you keep your defeated enemies?" "It's where I keep his kibble," Jake said. "You know, cat food." The translation devices of all three aliens immediately began working overtime, trying to process the concept of cat food, and somehow arriving at interpretations involving specially prepared nutritional supplements for tactical units, and processed enemy remains for optimal tactical specialist performance. Cultural attaché Zilm had shifted to a contemplative shade of blue. "Fascinating. Your species has developed specialized nutrition for your tactical partners. This suggests a level of symbiotic evolution that our xenobiologists have only theorized about." "It suggests I buy 30-pound bags of Fancy Feast from Costco," Jake replied, but the translation devices had already moved on to interpreting Fancy Feast as some kind of ceremonial victory meal and Costco as a military supply depot. Ambassador Kriok cleared his throat, which in his species sounded like a cricket having an argument with a chainsaw. "Human Jake Martinez, we must discuss the terms of your species' integration into the Galactic Council. Your military capabilities are clearly beyond our initial assessments." "My military capabilities," Jake said slowly, "consist of a desktop computer, a Netflix subscription, and a cat who thinks the red dot from a laser pointer is his mortal enemy." "Laser weaponry," Torx nodded approvingly. "Excellent choice for training purposes." "And the red dot," Zilm added, now a fascinated shade of orange, "is clearly a simulation system for honing hunting instincts." Jake looked down at Mr. Whiskers, who chose that moment to demonstrate his fearsome, predatory instincts by rolling over and exposing his belly for potential rubs. "Right," Jake said, with the tone of someone who was beginning to understand that this conversation was going to take significantly longer than he had originally planned. "I think we need to have a longer discussion about this. Would you like to come inside?" Ambassador Kriok's antennae twitched nervously. "Into your fortress?" "Into my apartment," Jake corrected. "It's got air conditioning and coffee. We're going to need both." And that was how Earth's first diplomatic reception ended up being held in Jake Martinez's living room, with humanity's most qualified ambassador being a cat who was primarily interested in whether these new visitors had any food with them and if they provided adequate lap space for napping. 3 hours later, Jake's living room looked like the aftermath of the galaxy's most confused diplomatic summit. Ambassador Kriok had somehow gotten his ceremonial robes tangled around Jake's coffee table and was being carefully extracted by cultural attaché Zilm, who had turned a helpful shade of green that apparently meant, "I'm trying to be useful, but I'm not entirely sure how." Military advisor Torx had discovered Jake's gaming chair and was sitting in it with the wonder of someone who had just learned that furniture could be comfortable, occasionally spinning in slow circles while muttering things like, "remarkable ergonomic design," and "clearly built for extended tactical planning sessions." Pip had claimed Jake's couch and was taking detailed notes on everything he observed, though most of his observations consisted of, "The tactical specialist has relocated to a sunny spot on the floor," and "The human has consumed his 14th cup of combat stimulant." And Mr. Whiskers, the unwitting cause of this entire intergalactic incident, had established himself as the undisputed center of attention by employing the most sophisticated diplomatic strategy known to his species. He had claimed Ambassador Kriok's lap, and was purring loudly enough to make the translation devices give up and simply output, "Contentment achieved. Diplomatic mission successful." "So let me get this straight," Jake said, nursing what was indeed his 14th cup of coffee and wondering if his insurance covered intergalactic incidents. Your sensors detected Mr. Whiskers purring, classified it as some kind of weapons system, decided we were apex predators, and now you want to invite humanity to join your space government. That is a gross oversimplification of our sophisticated threat assessment protocols, Ambassador Kriebach replied with wounded dignity, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that he was gently scratching Mr. Whiskers behind the ears while he said it. But yes, essentially correct. And now that you know we're not actually terrifying space warriors? Cultural attaché Zilm had shifted to what Jake had learned was his thoughtful academic color, a sort of swirled purple and gold that was actually quite pretty. Well, that's where things get interesting. You see, while you were explaining the true nature of your companion, we received some rather extraordinary news from the Galactic Council. Extraordinary how? Jake asked, though he was beginning to suspect that his definition of extraordinary and theirs might be operating on completely different scales. Zilm consulted a device that looked like a crystal ball had mated with a smartphone. It appears that Mr. Whiskers has been elected to the council. Jake nearly dropped his coffee mug. I'm sorry, what? During our extended diplomatic session here, Ambassador Kriebach explained, still absently petting the cat in question. The council was in emergency session trying to determine how to respond to the discovery of your species. They opened a communication channel to observe our negotiations. And, Jake prompted. And Mr. Whiskers meowed, Pip added helpfully from the couch. 17 times to be precise. The council's translation matrix interpreted his vocalizations as a comprehensive policy proposal for interspecies cooperation. Zilm continued, his colors shifting to what Jake was pretty sure was embarrassed but impressed. It was unanimously voted the most insightful diplomatic initiative they'd heard in decades. Jake looked down at Mr. Whiskers, who had paused in his purring, to fix Jake with the sort of stare that cats use when they want you to know they've been planning something, and you're only just now catching up. What exactly did they think he said? Military advisor Torx, who had been quietly spinning in the gaming chair for the past 20 minutes, finally spoke up. According to the official transcript, he proposed a new framework for peaceful coexistence based on mutual benefit, resource sharing, and the recognition that different species might have different definitions of what constitutes threatening behavior. He also apparently suggested that the Council's threat assessment protocols might need some recalibrating, Ambassador Kriebach added, which, in hindsight, was probably accurate. Jake rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of what was probably going to be a legendary headache. So my cat is now a galactic politician. Technically, he's the first Earth representative to the Galactic Council, Zilm corrected. We'll need a human liaison, of course, to handle the more complex aspects of interspecies diplomacy. And you want that to be me? You're clearly his chosen partner, Ambassador Kriebach pointed out. The tactical specialist has demonstrated complete trust in your capabilities. That's a recommendation that carries significant weight in the galactic community. Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to stretch, relocate himself to Jake's lap, and resume purring with the satisfaction of someone who had just successfully reorganized the known galaxy to his personal specifications. This is insane, Jake muttered, though he found himself automatically scratching the cat's favorite spot behind his left ear. I'm a software developer. I work from home. My biggest diplomatic achievement was convincing my neighbor to turn down his music after 10 p.m. And now you'll be convincing entire star systems to cooperate on interspecies policy initiatives, Torx said cheerfully, finally stopping his chair spinning to focus on the conversation. It's really just a matter of scale. A matter of scale, Jake repeated. Right. 3 months later, Jake Martinez was sitting in his new office aboard Galactic Council Station Harmony, looking out at a view that included 2 nebulae, a small moon, and what appeared to be a space Starbucks. His desk was considerably larger than his old one, mostly to accommodate the various alien technologies that Mr. Whiskers had somehow learned to operate, though learned might not be the right word since Jake was fairly certain the cat was just walking across keyboards and accidentally revolutionizing interstellar communication protocols. Mr. Whiskers himself was in his element, having discovered that his new position came with access to sunny spots on 17 different planets, an unlimited budget for premium cat treats, and a staff of alien diplomats who had somehow convinced themselves that his every meow was a profound statement on interstellar policy. Ambassador Whiskers, announced Jake's assistant, a cheerful crystalline being named Quinta, who had requested a transfer from scientific research after deciding that studying galactic politics was more interesting than studying space moss. The delegation from the Andromeda sector is here for their audience. Mr. Whiskers opened one eye, assessed the importance of this information against his current nap schedule, and apparently decided that galactic diplomacy could wait until he'd finished his current dream about tuna. "Tell them he's in a strategic planning session," Jake said, which had become his standard translation for, "The cat is sleeping and will see visitors when he's good and ready." "Of course, Ambassador Martinez," Quinta replied, her crystalline structure refracting the light in patterns that Jake had learned meant amused respect. "Shall I reschedule them for after his afternoon meal consultation?" "That would be perfect." As Jake turned back to his work, which today involved reviewing a proposal for standardized scratching post designs across 17 different species, he reflected on how his life had taken a turn that no career counselor could have possibly predicted. But looking at Mr. Whiskers, who was now purring in his sleep and occasionally twitching his paws, in what the galactic community had learned to recognize as subconscious policy development, communication was beginning to unravel. Jake had to admit that the universe had probably made the right choice. After all, if you were going to accidentally elect someone to reorganize galactic civilization, you could do a lot worse than a cat who had mastered the art of making everyone feel like their most important job was keeping him comfortable. And if that wasn't diplomacy, Jake wasn't sure what was.